I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me this opportunity to address you today. I was Secretary General of Amnesty International from 2001 until 2009, but I was always, and I'm still, a human rights advocate and an advocate for women's human rights. So let me begin. So let me begin, with all due respect to all the men in the room, let me begin by congratulating the women of the world and the women of Iran in this room. We are celebrating this year the 100th anniversary of the Day for Women. But for me, every day in the year is Women's Day. And of course, every day is Human Rights Day, because history shows that those who struggle for human rights prevail over those who use tyranny and oppression. And like the Berlin Wall in 1989, the dictators are tumbling one after the other in the Middle East. In Tunisia and Egypt, they're gone. Libya is in flames. Yemen is likely to be next. From Morocco to Manama, changes are sweeping at a pace and in a manner that would have been unimaginable just a month ago. There is, of course, a lot of uncertainty. Some are afraid that autocratic regimes will be replaced by fundamentalist regimes. Others see the potential for sectarian conflicts looming ahead. Now, what is clear is, whether for better or worse, the changes in the Middle East will profoundly affect Iran. Will the Iranian regime find new allies among these countries where changes are taking place and become emboldened? Or will the Iranian people see hope and take strength from the rising tide of democracy and human rights in that region? Now, the reaction of the Iranian regime has been very interesting. They commended the Egyptian population for overthrowing Mubarak, but then used batons and tear gas against peaceful Iranian demonstrators who wanted to support and show solidarity to their Arab neighbors. The path to freedom, human rights, equality, and justice is never straight nor easy, and no one knows it better than the Iranian people, because you know what happened after your revolution in 1979. Instead of a new dawn, Iran was plunged very soon into a darkness in which human rights violations have become the norm. The seriousness of the situation in Iran today led the UN General Assembly last year to take the very rare step of adopting a resolution expressing its concern about the appalling state of human rights in Iran, including torture, violence against women, repression of ethnic and religious minorities, and lack of accountability for the human rights violations following the 2009 presidential elections. When people rose up in protest after Iran's disputed presidential elections in 2009, the security forces arrested 6,000 individuals. That's not my figure. That's not Amnesty International's figure. That's not Human Rights Watch's figure. Those are the official figures of the Iranian government. And they used live bullets, live ammunition among the demonstrators, killing a number of them. Hundreds of people, lawyers, human rights defenders, journalists, civil society activists, opposition leaders have been tortured and are still languishing in prison. Some of them have been given harsh sentences after unfair trials, even executed. Journalists and bloggers have been silenced with tough prison sentences. Prominent lawyers who sought to defend the political opponents were thrown into prison themselves, and the repression of student groups has been particularly harsh. And since the beginning of this year, we have seen an upsurge of executions in Iran. Iran is the world's second highest executioner after China. In the month of January alone, more than 75 people were executed in Iran. And this has been interpreted by many as a deepening of the human rights crisis in the country. Among those executed were individuals accused of being supporters of the PMOI. Among them, Jafar Kazemi, Muhammad Ali Hajagai, and Ali Saremi. All their trials were unfair, and there are reports that they were also subjected to torture and ill treatment. In many cases, their executions took place without any notice to their own lawyers or families, in contravention of Iranian law. And in the cases of Mr. Kazemi and Mr. Saremi, the authorities used as evidence their visits to their family members in Camp Ashraf. The residents of Camp Ashraf themselves are living under constant threat from the Iraqi authorities, under a constant barrage of chants, slogans, threats, and abuse from 120 loudspeakers. I've seen photographs of these loudspeakers, and they are not just loudspeakers like this. They're actually pillars. They're big pillars with enormous velocity. And I believe that this kind of constant barrage of noise is psychological torture, and the United Nations must insist that it should stop. The residents also continue to have enormous difficulties to get medical care they need because of the restrictions that have been placed on them by the Iraqi Security Committee that is responsible for all matters relating to the camp, and several life-threatening and chronic cases are unable to access treatment. All people have to be treated with humanity and dignity, and the residents of Camp Ashraf cannot be made an exception to that. The UN, the US, and the Iraqi government cannot shirk their responsibility to ensure the basic rights and safety of the people living in Camp Ashraf. These are dark days for human rights in Iran, and I would say particularly for women of Iran. Women in Iran face far-reaching discrimination under the law. They are denied equal rights in marriage, divorce, child custody, and inheritance. Evidence given by a woman in court is considered only worth half that given by a man. A girl under the age of 13 can be forced to marry a man much older than her if her father agrees. A girl as young as 9 can be criminally liable, while the age of criminal liability for a boy is 16. According to the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, the punishment imposed on women is often far more harsh than that on men for the same crime. Gender-based violence is widespread, perpetuated by fundamentalist and patriarchal values and discriminatory laws and procedures. Women can be severely punished simply for wearing their veil loosely or their coats too tightly. And who decides what is too loose or too tight? For me, the issue of wearing a veil or not is about the freedom of choice of a woman. No woman should be forced by law to take off her veil, as has been the situation in this country, in France, or forced to put on a veil, as is the situation in Iran. It must be a woman's freedom of choice. The state's role is to create that situation where women can make that choice free from violence. On 8th of March, as we know, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. But for much more than 100 years, women in Iran have been fighting for their rights. Iranian history is replete with the names of women, brave women, poets, writers, thinkers, activists, who have been at the forefront of the struggle for equality and empowerment. And it is no mere coincidence that today some of the most persistent struggle for freedom, equality, and justice and democracy in Iran are being led by women in Iran and abroad. women are challenging discrimination. They are demanding equality, but they are being viewed with great suspicion and hostility by the Iranian regime. They have been seen as a threat. They have been labeled even as subversive elements supported by outsiders. Across the world, there is a tide that is washing on all the shores. And can the Iranian regime resist this tsunami calling for freedom and equality and democracy? As long as women are denied human rights anywhere in the world, there can be no justice and no peace. Recognizing women's equal rights is an essential requirement for the creation of strong, sustainable, and stable societies. It is the best way of resisting those dark forces that work against human rights, that work against peace around the world. But don't forget the women of Iran, because if you do not support those women, you will leave behind in that society the injustice that actually creates instability. So let's remember today, yes, the residents of Camp Ashraf who are suffering, who do not have their basic rights respected. Let's think about the women of the Middle East. Let's think about the men and the children, the young people. There's 40% unemployment among young people, among women in Iran. Let's think about them. But let's remember the central role that human rights plays in establishing security and stability. It's only when people feel safe, when they feel equal, when they feel that they're being treated fairly, that's when you get peace and stability. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.